to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is the author of the book Financial Freedom, no other than Mr. Ed Parcaut. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Ed, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. What would you like to know?
About being an author and podcaster, everything.
How long do we have?
20 to 30 minutes.
I just kidding. You're asking. I wrote a book 2 years ago. Came out in February of 20. What are we in 25? So 23. And I wanted to write a book, so I put my knowledge in somewhere that I could hand out to my clients, and they would understand the process easier for people to buy a home. And that's the reason I wrote the book. And then I've been in the mortgage industry for 27 years. I've been in a documentary about real estate and how people made money. I do a local radio show that now is getting syndicated, so we're going to be in many, many different markets. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, and my purpose is always about education, making sure that people understand what they're doing.
Mr. Ed Parcaut, thank you so much for educating us. So, what are the first steps the book suggests for someone looking to achieve financial freedom through real estate?
I'm sorry, was there a question there, sir?
Yes, what are the first steps the book suggests for someone looking to achieve financial freedom?
The first
True.
step is to figure out where you are at this point in your life. What I mean by that is I created a book, and it's how I would qualify somebody. The first thing we look at is your credit to see where your credit is, because then we can, if your credit's not where it needs to be, we need to work on it and fix it. And then you go to the next step, which is your income. We look at where your income is, because if you don't have enough income, well, maybe we need you to get to a better job or do a couple different things. And then the third thing we look at is assets, how much money you have for a down payment. You, and that's the easiest one to get. That's why we start with the credit, because credit's the hardest. If we don't have the credit, we can't move forward. So we always tell people, when you're ready to, people always ask me, when is the perfect time to buy? It's the moment you're thinking about it is when you need to get started and going down that process. And that's what my book will do. I'll explain that process for you. And so when you do go through the process, if you're working with somebody, you'll understand everything that you're supposed to be doing. You'll understand as it comes to you, because us as loan officers, a lot of times we talk to clients, we say the same thing over and over again so we can make sure that they understand it. But then sometimes we get sidetracked because of a question that throws off and forget something. With the book, it does not allow that to happen. You'll understand everything you need to know.
So, Mr. Ed, speaking of credit score, what is the best credit score when you're buying a house?
Well, it depends on the different types of loans you're going for. The best FICO score, anything over 740 doesn't matter anymore for conventional loans. But you're still other programs like FHA, you can have a credit score down as low as 600. I mean, they say 580, but I'm in this rule of thumb that if you're at a 580 FICO score, let's work on a couple things to get you to 620, because the difference in that interest rate is huge. It could be a 1% difference in an interest rate. Same thing with VA, the same thing goes there. Is if your FICO score, it can be as low as 580, but why not get you to 640 and get a better rate? And so that's what I do. I work with everybody in that process.
Certainly. So, Mr. Ed, what are the common misconceptions about home ownership and wealth building?
I think the biggest misconception is that you need 20% down to buy a house. And you do not need that. You need 3% down. You can buy a house for no money down. There's many different programs out there for that. But that's people's biggest misconceptions of how much money they need in the process. And that's, you come to somebody like myself or read my book, and we'll explain that for you and help you out there. That's the biggest misconception. The other thing is, the other misconception people have is that when you own a home versus renting, a homeowner will have $250,000 more in equity over time than a renter will. And that's the biggest thing. That is a huge, you build personal wealth through home ownership. And a lot of people will get the first house, then get a second house. I focus on people who are focusing on that first house to get them into that process, because that is a huge change for their trajectory of their family going forward. Now that they own a home, that they changes everything in their lives for the better.
So, what strategies does the book offer for choosing the right property for long term wealth building?
Hey, well, I focus mainly in the book on the person and then what we need to do for there. And then we look at what property works for you. And there are, because I mean, you have to look at where you are in your life potentially. If you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it could be a totally different house and a totally different way to do that. However, the most important thing I do for most people when they're buying their first home, I try to get them to buy what's called a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex. That way you can rent out all the other units and live in the first one. And now when you're ready to buy that beautiful home to have your children and everything else, you have an investment home already. And you can do that with 3.5% down or 5% down. Where if you were going to buy that later as an investment property, you'd have to put 25% down.
So, what advice does the book give about managing a mortgage effectively?
It gives advice on making sure that you make your payment on time, and that's the most important thing because if well, I talk about if you go through trouble because people sometimes have issues that happen, lose a job, someone gets sick, something happens. You want to make sure you make your mortgage payment on time. You the, you can let the other stuff go, the credit cards, the car loans, all that kind of stuff, but keep your mortgage intact because that is what will help you in the future moving forward, or being able to potentially refinance that down the road. Because if you have a late on a mortgage, you cannot refinance that if you've had a late in the last 12 months.
Very well said, Mr. Ed. Very well said. So, how does the book suggest handling property taxes and insurance to avoid financial stress?
Make sure you put them in your payment, what's called impounding, which means that when you make your payment on a monthly basis, it includes your taxes and insurance in your payment. So that way you will not get behind, because people who do not have their tax and insurance in their payments sometimes will get behind on their taxes. And after 5 years, they can start selling off that tax lien to somebody else. And then eventually somebody else could own your home.
Interesting indeed. So, what are the risks associated with homeownership and how can they mitigate it?
I think the biggest risk these days is, which is recent stuff, is the different insurances throughout the United States. So it depends on where you're purchasing. If you, I should have asked you, sir, first, where's your audience at? But most, if you're buying in Florida right now, it is a buyer's market right now, because
Yes.
of the hurricanes and the insurance things that have happened. Texas is slowly getting the back the same way, and California now, where I am, we're starting to see that kind of stuff happening after that big LA fire. With the actual property insurance is becoming more expensive, so that is one of your biggest risks that you have to be careful with. That you can't control it, so you just have to make sure you have some extra money put aside, so when you go to buy a house, make sure you have a little fund set aside in case something happens, and that's what you want to make sure you have.
Certainly. Extra budget, people. So, Mr. Ed, let's talk about financial freedom and wealth building. How can owning a property help you to build equity over time?
Because if you own a home, what happens is over time it appreciates. And also, when you make your payment every month, you pay down the mortgage by adding the principal. You're paying down the principal on that loan. Over time, if you look at historically, we have a 5%, 4 to 5% appreciation rate on a home over a 30-year period, and that increases depending on where you live in the United States. In California, in 2020, 21, and 22, in my area, we rose 66% in equity, in value of the home that went up. And in other places, it did the same thing. So if you owned a home, got that appreciation, and now you have that equity built into that property, so that you could do something else with that. You could take some equity out, buy another house that you want to live in, and rent out that one you just left. We did it. We bought a cabin years ago, and from that cabin, we bought 32 acres and to build a house on, and we've been doing other things like that ever since. So it's the over time you will pay down the mortgage, and the equity will build in that property so that you can do other things with it.
Yes. Smart investment. What role does passive income play in achieving financial freedom through real estate?
And that would probably be about 10% of my clients who come to me want to buy additional real estate and as a rental, which means you own the property, you have somebody live there, they make the rental payment to you, and then you apply the difference to pay off your loan. That is called passive income over time because you're going to not have to do anything. You just have to collect the rents. And I know a lot of people who went with single family homes have now been into apartment complexes. I know some people who do it with um, uh, RV parks. They do it with, I mean, unique situations where most people wouldn't even think about it. And they've done these situations to where that they get the passive income from that. That's what real estate is. Real estate is always passive income. And if you depending on who you are, but if you have your own company or if you work for somebody, you should have other forms of passive income to help you out throughout your life. So that way you don't have to work so hard, plus build you up. So eventually you can just not work and with
Yes.
or do what you want, I should say, as your work because you're building that passive income. And there's been a lot more so than I've ever seen in the history in the last, I'd say, 10 years, more people owning residential real estate or different types of properties for investments than I've ever seen before.
Yes, people create something that in a long term, it will give you a passive income. So, how can someone balance the cost of home ownership with the other financial goals?
You said the cost of home ownership.
Yes.
I think home ownership costs you when you don't do it, because if you're going to live somewhere, you're going to pay rent. You're going to pay something in rent, and the difference between owning a home and that rent, say right now, is probably $1,000 difference on a month, depending on where you live. During lower interest rates, it was only a difference. It was probably most people bought a home during 2020, 21, and into part of 22 because they were like, this is it's cheaper to own a home than to rent. And then it got to when rates went up, they said it's it's the same as renting. I might as well own a home. And then how actual rents back went up to average rents and above average rents, and it got to a point where now it's a little bit more expensive to own a home than it is to rent. However, over time, a 5 year period or 6 year period, that will inverse curve where it's going to be cheaper to own a home than it is to rent. And that's what you have to do. So there's a stepping into the mortgage market or buying a home, how it used to be over time. There was only a period of time, about 3 years, where it was so easy, everybody was doing it. We're back to the way it was, where you have to put something in, some skin in the game to actually own a home.
Certainly. And nowadays, I think people is complaining that the same with the renting than buying the house. So they are now preferring to buy the house because it's equivalent to renting a house. So what are the some ways to make a property more profitable through renovations or renting?
Uh, to make it more, so you got to be careful with renovations. If you're doing renovations and you're living there, you're doing it for you to live there. It will take time for you to get your money back into it. I have had people who are looking to sell their house and buy another house and thinking about remodeling kitchens, remodeling bathrooms. It's usually cheaper not to do that. Let the next person do that because you're not going to get that dollar for dollar back out of there if you're doing that. Now, you have people who flip homes. That's a different situation. They're trying to get it at a lower cost and then do the work to it and still sell it to where they make money off of. That's different. Most people who are doing their own home, they're doing these remodels for something that they want to live in, and just understand it takes time to get that money back out. If you remodel a kitchen, average kitchens can cost $50,000. You're not going to get that direct dollar for dollar like they show on the shows on TV where it cost us $100,000 and now my house just went up $100,000. It doesn't work that way in real life.
Listen
Be
to Mr.
careful.
Ed, people. Experience. So what is the relationship between credit scores and buying a home for wealth building?
The You need to have a good FICO score to buy homes. That's why it's the first thing in my book. Credit is the most important thing, and it's also something we can fix very easily over time. Or a lot of times, people will, if they're trying to buy a house right now and their FICO score is a little lower, they can get added on their parents' credit cards as an authorized user, and that will up their scores. And that's something they can do to help themselves get into where they get a better FICO score so they can own a home. And the FICO score, when we quote rates and we talk about rates, the first thing we look at is the FICO score because it's based off of risk based pricing. So the higher your FICO score, the better the rate's going to be.
So, Mr. Ed, what would be your advice for those people out there want to attain their financial freedom when they are buying their house?
I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't hear the first part.
What would be your advice for those people out there that want to attain their financial freedom and yet they are still paying their house?
They're paying a house or renting
Yes,
a.
their mortgage.
Well, that's over time. They will, because you will over time. You're always going to have a mortgage to a certain point. Mortgages aren't the reason you don't have financial freedom, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of mortgages and a lot of properties, and they have a lot of financial freedom because the amount of money coming in through the rents are paying off those mortgages. If you're looking at so yeah, you look at this at long term, Daniel. It's not today. It's a process to where you're looking at this over a 5 or 10 year period when you're acquiring real estate. Over time, you acquire real estate to be financial free. Same with having the passive income. It's all about when do you buy it, and does it pay the mortgage? Does it pay this? You do not buy investment property for passive income that do not cover the rents. The rents don't cover the mortgage. That's not how you do it. People have done that in the past where they think, I'm buying this property and over time my rent will pay my mortgage payment. That's not how you do that. That's how you get into trouble. So be careful doing that. True investors do not do that. They don't wait for the appreciation. They focus on how much money they're making off the payment right now.
Oh, people, I hope you will listen to Mr. Ed. So, thank you for your advice. And what would be your short term and long term goals in writing?
My and goals in writing.
Yes.
I have another book about ready to come out called. It's basically just like my current book, Financial Freedom, but it's only for veterans and the VA loan, and it breaks it down for them and their benefits. My other book I have coming out is one for people going through a divorce, how to handle the real estate through a divorce. And then my third one that's coming out is called Podcast Mastery, which is build, grow, and monetize when it comes to podcasting. So those will be out in the next 30 days.
Looking forward for those books, Mr. Ed, and you are most welcome to come back and let's talk about it. So, how can someone use leverage in real estate to build wealth?
That is the only way. So one thing about real estate is that's how you build wealth, is because it is leverage. What I mean by that is, if you're going to buy $200,000 in stocks, you got to have $200,000 in money to buy those stocks. If you're buying a $200,000 home, you only need 3% or 5% down to be able to purchase that home. So you only need 5%. That's called leverage. And that's how you build equity and how you build wealth through real estate. And that's where most people have made their wealth in real estate. I know a lot of people made their wealth in other things, but a lot of people made their wealth in real estate.
So, what are some long term strategies for using home ownership to create generational wealth?
If you buy your home today, now your kids will understand that they should be buying a home. Plus, your house will appreciate over time. And then you can actually take some of that equity and give it to your kids to help them buy a house. Or what I see a lot of people doing right now is they understand that eventually in the future, it's going to be very difficult for their kids to own homes because of where the appreciation of homes are going, that they buy a couple different homes now so that they can actually have those for their kids in the future. And but that just the fact of owning a home will change the trajectory of that family, because now they own that house. They're going to stay in that house. They're going to build memories there. That is going to be their house. And the kids will understand, hey, my parents own a home. I need to go out and buy a home, and that's what's really important to have that process so people understand that.
So, Mr. Ed, how can avoid common pitfalls such as over leveraging or buying beyond your means?
Well, that's with working with somebody like me to make sure that that doesn't happen. We It's not about we make sure that you understand. Because when we look at a property, it's not how much I can qualify you for, it's how much of a payment you want. And what I mean by that is because a lot of times people want, I can qualify you for much higher of a payment than you want to have on a monthly basis, just because our ratios and stuff that we can push those numbers to are they look at long term what that's been, and this is okay. But for most people, they don't want that type of a payment. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable, you have a budget, you put everything in place, budget out what you want to spend on a monthly basis, budget out what you want on a house payment, and then understand that you might have to go a little bit more than that in order to get that house that you're looking for. Or also just maybe if it's just if it's two of you, maybe you don't need a 3,000 square foot house. You could get away with a 1,200 square foot house. It's your first house. It's not your forever home. Remember that when you buy your first house, it's just your first house. It's not your forever home.
Yes, people, listen to Mr. Ed. So, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in its fifth season, people, fifth season, with Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. And please do listen to our latest episode. We are reading our letter senders all over the world. So, Mr. Ed, how can someone calculate and assess the true cost of homeownership to determine if it's good financial investment?
Well, again, it's going to depend on where you are, whether you're in the States or whether you're in Canada, because you're in Canada, correct?
Yes.
And you guys have what's called portability of mortgages, which means you can move your mortgage to the next house, which we don't have that in the United States. We actually have to get a new loan every time we buy a different house. So if we had that option, and like you guys have, we would more and more people would buy homes because of that. But you also there's a give and take on both sides of that. So
Mm.
you just so when you're I would just tell anybody that you want to own your home. Now, if it's you're a single person and you don't know where you're going to move for the rest of your life, would you own a home? Yeah, because it's your house. You could always rent it out down the road. You could always move, sell it. You're going to make appreciation in that house. And that's how you can build money going forward. And that's what you want to do. I don't know if I answered your question, Daniel, but I hope I did.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Ed. And again, Mr. Ed Parco. Thank you so much for sharing financial freedom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books as well as your podcasts?
Yes, please support all my stuff. If you want to find anything about me, go to edparco.com.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ed Perko because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Ed, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
More to come, people. See you soon. So, Mr. Ed, thank you so much for your time. Again, you are most welcome